Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what time of the day you're actually watching this. My name is Imani Richardson, and I am going to be presenting to you on sarin. Sarin is a potent organophosphate that was actually used as a pesticide initially until 1938 when German scientists actually manufactured it into a neurotoxic nerve agent. This neurotoxic nerve agent includes carbon, hydrogens, oxygen, phosphate, as well as a fluorine. Sarin is also known by its Sarin is also known by its military designation GB, and it is one of the most toxic known chemical warfare agents. And it is also known as GA tabum, GF, cyclosarin, GD, soman, and VX. It generally appears as an odorless, tasteless vapor, and it can actually cause a fatality within a fraction of an ounce or within minutes. So according to the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, sarin vapors are heavier than air, and they will spread along the ground and collect into low-lying areas. So it's just like poorly ventilated areas. So hypothetically speaking, so if this was a valley, sarin would pool at the bottom of that lower area. It wouldn't actually dispense evenly because it's actually more dense than air. It can actually be absorbed into the body via inhalation, ingestion, as well as dermal contact. As I mentioned before, death can occur within 1 to 10 minutes of inhalation to sarin. And individuals at risk for sarin exposure, as of current, are individuals who are in the military or individuals who are manufacturing the substance, and unfortunately individuals who may be affected by terroristic attacks. The most recent sarin attack, if I remember right now off the top of my head, was in Syria. I want to say it was in August of 2013. So just to put into context the amount of sarin that can actually cause a fatality, I created a chart that you can find on slide 5. Well, I didn't create a chart. On slide 5, you'll find a table, and then you'll see some references when it comes down to micrograms to kilograms. So in a human inhalation, 90 micrograms per cubic meter can cause a death. So we know LD50 means 50% of individuals exposed may die from exposure of sarin. So at LD50 human inhalation, the amount of the exposure is 90 micrograms per cubic meter. So if we wanted to translate that into kilograms, 1 gram equals 1,000 milligrams. 1,000 grams equals 1 kilogram. And this is still in cubic meters. So essentially 1 kilogram, translates into 1,000,000 micrograms per cubic meter. And so hypothetically speaking, that's about the size of a pinhead, not the actual whole needle, but just the pinhead on the top of a needle. That's how much that's how much is needed to actually cause a lethal dose in at least 50% of the population. So signs and symptoms of sarin exposure may include, the first indications may include some twitching, sweating, runny noses, shortness of breath, tightness in the chest, and like dimness of vision. More severe exposures may result in headaches, cramps, nausea, vomiting, muscle twitching, urination, involuntary defecation as well, staggering, and respiratory arrest. There are 2 antidotes available, and their more common names are atropine and 2-PAM. So there was a study done on guinea pigs. So the dose response effects of repeated subacute sarin exposure on guinea pigs. The present study assessed the effects of repeated subacute exposure to the organophosphate phosphorus nerve agent sarin. Guinea pigs were injected 5 times per week for 2 weeks with a fraction of the established lethal dose of sarin. The animals were assessed for the development of seizures, changes in body weights, changes in their red blood counts, acetylcholine estrase levels, and neural behavior over the course of 2 weeks. The two things that were noted throughout the study was the actual changes in the body weight, and the red blood count levels, as well as the acetylcholine estrase. So the official results for guinea pigs receiving 0.3, 0.4, and 0.5 times the lethal dose, they didn't have any seizures, but their baseline amount of acetylcholine estrase as well as red blood cell count decreased by 10% below the baseline. Seizures were present in animals that received 0.6 times the amount of sarin, and about 2 out of 13 of the animals receiving at least 0.5% of the times the lethal dose died before all 10 injections could be administered. So sarin is a cholinergic system disruptor. So I have a little information about the cholinergic system. The cholinergic system includes the parasympathetic nervous system, which uses acetylcholine to send messages. It uses acetylcholine almost exclusively, which is why it's been coined the term the cholinergic system. It also includes neuromuscular junctions, preganglionic neurons of the sympathetic nervous system, the basal forebrain, the brain stem, as well, are all part complexes that are considered cholinergic. Sarin actually inhibits the binding of acetylcholine estrase enzymes. It actually exaggerates functions of the central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous systems. And this is, we can see heart rate increases and decreases because it also causes paralysis as a result of the excessive buildup as well in the muscarinic and nicotinic receptors. So we can find blood pressure increases and decreases, interruptions in gastrointestinal movement, as well as secretions. Eyes, because normally the acetylcholine is used to protect the eyes from excessive sunlight. That's what the enzyme does. It sends that message, helps send that message. And also we can see issues with the emptying of bladders and the rectum. So the muscarinic system receptors of acetylcholine are located on smooth muscles and exocrine glands. The nicotinic receptors of acetylcholine are located on autonomic ganglia connecting to pre- and postganglionic neurons and on neuromuscular junctions. And so this overstimulation of this receptor, or the lack thereof, the paralysis of it, can cause excessive, or overstimulation can cause excessive muscle twitching. And so inhibition of acetylcholine has also been linked to issues such as Alzheimer's as well as Parkinson's disease. So on slide 10, you'll see an actual image. So from left to right in the purple area, you'll see 2 oxygen molecules, a hydrogen, 2 nitrogen, a hydrogen, and then you'll see an oxygen binding to a phosphate. So that phosphate, as well as all the other molecules surrounding it, that is actual sarin. So that area where that phosphate is connected to the oxygen is where it is binding the inhibition of acetylcholine estrase. Excuse me. So I mentioned earlier that there are 2 antidotes to sarin. So the first one I'm going to discuss is oxamine. Oxamine is the actual name for it, but the more common name is 2-PAM, and that is an acetylcholine estrase reactivator, and is actually administered by an auto-injector. If you're familiar with auto-injectors, you'd be just familiar with the EpiPen. So that's an auto-injector where you take the pen and you put it in the thickest muscle, which is normally the thigh. So it is administered through an auto-injector and is effective at both nicotinic and muscarinic receptors. In the event that oxamine is administered to an otherwise healthy individual, it can cause dizziness, blurred visions, and hypertension. And so anticholinergic antidote is known as atropine, which is the more common name, and is administered the same way via an EpiPen, an auto-injector similar to an EpiPen, and it can be administered intravenously or intraosseously, and intraosseously means directly into the bone marrow. And it is a competitive antagonist against the acetylcholine esterase, but it only provides symptomatic relief. It doesn't actually work on the nicotinic receptors, and it can induce, if administered to an otherwise healthy individual, it can induce anticholinergic toxicities, and that includes the infected effects include blurred vision, dilated pupils, dry mouth, inability to sweat, tachycardia, which is rapid heartbeat or irregular heartbeat as well, and it can actually include urinary retention. So, in history, there have been multiple sarin attacks. I mentioned earlier that the most recent attack, and this may be outdated, was in Syria in August 2013, and 1,729 individuals died, and then there were 3,600 individuals who had non-fatal injuries, and this was in Syria, and apparently, according to the information that I found, it was carried out by the Syrian government in Ghouta, Syria, I believe. But the attack that I want to mention, the one that I initially learned about, was carried out by the Shrinkyo. So the Shrinkyo was a domestic terrorist group in Japan. They had two different attacks. One they held in 1994, and the other one was in 1995. So the March 1995 attack, I believe, was a little more notable, and it was carried out by, it was 5 coordinated attacks. And so what they did was they actually boarded trains, at least 3 lines on the Tokyo subway, and they carried bags of sarin, literally plastic bags of sarin. So one individual, maybe 2 or 3 of the individuals had 0.9 liters, and the other individual had about 1.3 liters of sarin in a plastic bag. And these plastic bags were wrapped in newspapers, and what they did was they got on the official trains. And these trains were in transit around government centers. And so what happened was they got on the trains with their plastic bags wrapped in newspaper, and they pretty much carried umbrellas with a sharpened tip. So the sharpened tip of the umbrellas were used to actually puncture the bags. And because of sarin's high volatility, it actually transitioned from being a liquid into a gas, a gaseous vapor, really quick. And so they got off the train once they punctured the bags and met up with their counterparts in cars. And so what happened, because sarin is odorless and colorless, many of the individuals riding the trains or boarding the trains or just within the subway system didn't even know they were being exposed. And so it essentially caused 12 acute sarin exposure deaths, 641 casualties, and 349 hospitalizations, but it affected 5,000 plus individuals. Okay, slide. One moment. All right. So, in the event of a sarin exposure, hopefully no one ever gets exposed to sarin or any of the toxic agents or neurotoxic agents. In the event of a sarin exposure, you want to go through the decontamination process. So, on slide 14, you'll see a couple of images of individuals, and those individuals include me and as well as some other course participants at a federal training facility held in Anniston, Alabama, known as the Center for Domestic Preparedness, and it is coordinated through FEMA. So I had the opportunity to go to Anniston, Alabama for a CBURNS training, which is chemical, biological, nuclear, radiologic, and explosive mass casualty events. And during this training, we weren't allowed to take pictures in part of the facility, but we were transported to an undisclosed location where the military airlifted sarin, ricin, and anthrax to the training site. But before we got into the official room, we were all covered in protective equipment, our PPE. We had the breathing apparatuses. We had we were completed, we were in gloves, we were in boots, we were pretty much zip tied and taped down. There was no points of entry at the moment in time. So when we went in, we had the opportunity to see all the chemicals in different rooms. We actually had the opportunity to actually test for it to see if it actually was what it was to test for it. We also had the opportunity to neutralize it, I guess you can say, as well. So in the Sea Burns event, we went through the facility and we saw these different chemicals. Hopefully I'll never have to see it outside of an actual suit and outside of a controlled environment. And so, as I was mentioning before, in the decontamination process, in the event of an actual sarin exposure, you want to actually, if you're on the part of triaging, you want to triage your individuals. If an individual is incapacitated, the one thing they'll tell you, even if they are not incapacitated, or if someone's been exposed to these toxins, they have to take off all their clothes. So you pretty much essentially have to get naked and you have to wash, scrub every area. If the individual has hair, you have to wash their hair, under their nails, everything, because you want to wash the toxin off. And then once they transition through, of course, you provide them with a different set of clothes, hopefully. But you have to wash everything off. So hydrate, water, use excessive amounts of water. That's what I'll say, excessive amounts of water and soap. But it was a great experience, and I would definitely suggest if anyone's interested in partaking in the training at the Center for Domestic Preparedness. Since the different sarin attacks, as well as the different world wars, there was something that came about called the Geneva Convention, which actually was a treaty that was signed in 1925 that prohibited chemical weapons in warfare. These chemical weapons were considered asphyxiants, poisonous, or other poisonous gas, or other gases, chemicals, and bacteriological methods. And then essentially from that moment, the 1997 Chemical Weapons Convention was held. And the Chemical Weapons Convention actually prohibited the development, production, stockpiling of these chemical weapons, as well as promoted their destruction. And apparently 90% of chemical agents have been destroyed since this 1997 convention. On slide 16, you'll see that there is another chart, table, if you want to call it that, of the world stockpile and destruction of chemical weapons. So we'll just go straight to the United States because that's us here currently. Apparently, we were slated to have to destroy the majority of our items by 2013. At the time, we were verified to have destroyed 90% of our product. I can't state where the status of that is currently, but I just recently had my experience in October of 2015 with seeing sarin, ricin, and anthrax in person. So hopefully, not just the United States, but hopefully other members of the world have decided to join on this committee, join on to the convention's ideas, and actually destroy more of their toxic agents. So if you're looking for more information about sarin, I would definitely say you could contact your regional poison control center. You can also contact the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, contact their info line, or you can actually email them. Another option is to contact, well, not necessarily contact, but you can use the National Institute of Health. Has two different databases. One of the databases is through the National Center of Biotechnology Information, and it's called the PubChem Open Chemistry Database. And the other one is the National Library ToxNet, and this one has toxicology data. And then there's also the EPA Chemistry Dashboard. So if you have any questions, I'm looking forward to your comments, and any ideas and suggestions are more than welcome. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.